Gangamamnamai ki jai, Tulsi Devi Bhakti Devi ki jai, Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Nitai Gaur Premanandi, Shri Baladev Subhadra Jagannath ki jai, Shri Gaur Nitai ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Shri Guru Vandana. The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can cross. Shri Guru Vandana. The lotus feet of our spiritual master are the only way by which we can attain pure devotion and service. I bow down to his lotus feet in great awe and reverence. By his grace we can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from the laws of power. Attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection of the will of all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with his transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, the Lord of the world. From whom his death of emanates, by whom ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master is the ocean of mercy, the friend of the poor, and the Lord master of the devotees. O Master, be merciful to us. Give us the shade of your feet. May your fame is spread all over the world. Accept the field of speech. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Govinda Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Govinda Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada Shila Prabhupada, Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Gaur Premanande, Samaved Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai, Shila Prabhupada ki Jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai, Gaur Premanande. Hari Hari Bo. Hari Nasbucha. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Narayana Namaskritya Narancheva Narottamam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Mudirayet Nastapreshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Hare Krishna. Welcome, dear devotees, to today's Scientific Saturdays. So, as you probably all know, every 2 weeks we have a special Srimad Bhagavatam class about where we discuss different topics of Srimad Bhagavatam in the light of science. So today the title is The Goal of Vedic Science and Its Process, Vedic Science versus Modern Science. And the text is from the first canto, second chapter, Divinity and Divine Service. Text 21. Vidyate Hridaya Grantis Chidyante Sarva Samsaya Kshiyante Chasya Karmani Drishtaivatmanishvare Vidyante Hridaya Grantis Chidyante Sarva Samsaya Kshiyante Chasya Karmani Drishtaivatmanishvare Vidyate Hridaya Grantis Chidyante Sarva Samsaya Kshiyante Chasya Karmani Drishtaivatmanishvare
Vidyate Hridaye
Vidyate hridaya grantis.
Siddhyante sarva samshayaha.
Kshidyante sarva samsaya.
Shriyante chasya karmani.
Kshyante jasa karmani. Drishtaivatmanishvare.
Vidyante hridaya grantis.
Vidyante hridaya grantis.
Siddhyante sarva samshayaha.
Vidyante sarva samsaya.
Kshiyante chasya karmani.
Kshyante jasa karmani.
Drishtaivatmanishvare.
Drishtaivatmanishvare. Mataji's. Vidyate hridaya grantis. Chidyante sarva samsaya. Chiyante jasa karmani. Drishtaivatmanishvare. Vidyante hridaya grantis. Chidyante sarva samsaya. Kshiyante chasya karmani. Drishtaivatmanishvare. Vidyate hridaya grantis. Chidyante sarva samsaya. Kshiyante chasya karmani. Drishtaivatmanishvare. Vidyate, pierced. Hridaya, heart. Granti, knots. Chidyante, cut to pieces. Sarva, all. Samsayaha, misgivings. Kshiyante, terminated. Cha, and. Asya, his. Karmani, chain of fruitive actions. And drishti, having seen. Eva, certainly. Atmani, unto the self. Ishvare, dominating. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Thus the knot in the heart is pierced, and all misgivings are cut to pieces. The chain of fruitive actions is terminated when one sees the self as master. Please repeat after me. Thus the knot in the heart is pierced, and all misgivings are cut to pieces. The chain of fruitive actions is terminated when one sees the self as master. Purport. Attaining scientific knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead means seeing one's own self simultaneously. As far as the identity of the living being as spirit self is concerned, there are a number of speculations and misgivings. The materialist does not believe in the existence of the spirit self, and the empiric philosophers believe in the impersonal feature of the whole spirit without individuality of the living beings. But the transcendentalists affirm that the soul and the supersoul are two different identities, qualitatively one, but quantitatively different. There are many other theories, but all these different speculations are at once cleared off as soon as Sri Krishna is realized in truth by the process of Bhakti Yoga. Sri Krishna is like the sun, and the materialist speculations about the absolute truth are like the darkest midnight. As soon as the Krishna sun is arisen within one's heart, the darkness of materialistic speculations about the absolute truth and the living beings is at once cleared off. In the presence of the sun, the darkness cannot stand, and the relative truth that were hidden within the dense darkness of ignorance become clearly manifested by the mercy of Krishna, who is residing in everyone's heart as the Supersoul. In Bhagavad Gita 10:11, the Lord says that in order to show special favor to his pure devotees, he personally eradicates the dense darkness of all misgivings by switching on the light of pure knowledge within the heart of a devotee. Therefore, because the personality of Godhead is taking charge of illuminating the heart of his devotee, certainly a devotee engaged in his service in transcendental love cannot remain in darkness. He comes to know everything of the absolute and the relative truths. The devotee cannot remain in darkness, and because a devotee is enlightened by the personality of Godhead, his knowledge is certainly perfect. This is not the case for those who speculate on the absolute truth by dint of their own limited power of approach. Perfect knowledge is called parampara, or deductive knowledge, coming down from the authority to the submissive oral receiver who is bona fide by service and surrender. One cannot challenge the authority of the Supreme and know him also at the same time. He reserves the right of not being exposed to such a challenging spirit of an insignificant spark of the whole, a spark subjected to the control of illusory energy. Devotees are submissive, and therefore the transcendental knowledge descends from the personality of Godhead to Brahma, and from Brahma to his sons and disciples in succession. This process is helped by the Supersoul within such devotees. That is the perfect way of learning transcendental knowledge. This enlightenment perfectly enables the devotee to distinguish spirit from matter, because the knot of spirit and matter is untied by the Lord. This knot is called ahankara, and it falsely obliges a living entity to become identified with matter. As soon as this knot is loosened, therefore, all the clouds of doubt are at once cleared off. One sees his master and fully engages himself in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, making a full termination of the chain of fruitive actions. In material existence, a living being creates his own chain of fruitive work and enjoys the good and bad effects of those actions life after life. But as soon as he engages himself in loving service of the Lord, he at once becomes free from the chain of karma. His actions no longer create any reaction. Vidyate hridaya grantis, chidyante sarva samsaya, kshiyante jasa karmani drishta evatmanishvare. Thus the knot in the heart is pierced, and all misgivings are cut to pieces. The chain of fruitive actions is terminated when one sees the self as master. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So Hare Krishna, dear devotees, once again. So today, today's verse is a very important verse. It actually comprises the conclusion of a number of verses which are an answer to the questions of the sages of Naimisharanya, which were asking, what is to be done being in this situation, situated in a material body, in a material world. It's somehow the conclusion. Is also interesting to notice that there is another verse which is practically identical to this verse, which was spoken by Lord Sri Krishna to Uddhava in the 11th canto. The only difference is actually the last stanza, the last line. It starts the same, vidyate hridagrantis, chidante sarvasam, akshiyante chasakarmani, mai drishte kilatmani. Krishna says there that instead of drishtavam evatmanishvare, when one sees the self as master, Krishna states, when one sees me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Prabhupada makes actually the same point in the purport, which means that to realize the absolute truth includes the realization of one's own position. Meaning that if one understands one's own self and his position, that goes along with the realization of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as being the absolute truth. So today we chose this verse in relation to our scientific Saturdays lectures, and we would like to compare a little the Vedic view of acquiring scientific knowledge versus the understanding of modern science. Prabhupada was very emphatic that we preach to scientists also, because he stated that scientists are actually somehow the intellectual leaders of modern society. They're, in a way, the head of society, meaning that they're taking the position of the Brahmins, meaning they're giving the advice to the rulers, or supposed to give the advice to the rulers, to the Kshatriya. So, modern science defies the definition of modern science is actually the systematic knowledge of physical or material, of the physical or material world, gained through observation and experimentation. So, and already from this definition, which they have given themselves, we can see that it is not at all tally with the Vedic version, because it only limits itself to the mundane material realm. But as the Vedas state very clearly, this, or the kingdom of God, the creation of the Supreme Personality of God, it comprises actually the spiritual and the material world. But it also states or gives us the understanding of the present situation the world is actually in. Due to being focused mainly, or actually we can say only, on the material realm, whatever we can perceive with our senses, it is actually very limited and it is incomplete. Because the source of all the material universes, as well as the living entities in the material universes, is actually the absolute truth, the spiritual being. Prabhupada makes also the point in his purport where he paraphrases the Vedic statements, Nityo Nityanam Chetanas Chetananam, there is one supreme conscious being amongst many conscious beings, and that is Nitya. He is the eternal living entity amongst many other living entities, and that specific entity is maintaining all the others. So this is important for us devotees to understand, that when we deal with modern science, we always have to be careful and understand that it is good to study and to acquire knowledge. Prabhupada also states in one of his lectures that it's natural for the living entity to be inquisitive and want to know, and it's also good that he studies and in that way follows this intention. But he actually should come to the conclusion that studying any kind of fields in the material realm, that finally Krishna is the ultimate source of it. So in that way we can understand material science in a way can be helpful to lead us to the ultimate goal. Like, in one way it can be compared, the Vedas have Sat Darshan, there are 6 main philosophies or thoughts which the Vedic knowledge deals about. And one time Srila Bhakti Maharaj actually asked Srila Prabhupada that Srila Prabhupada makes many statements that actually 5 of these different philosophies dealing with different aspects of the material world are actually materialistic. So, how to understand, how they can be helpful. Then Prabhupada made the point, if these different branches of Vedic thoughts are taken independently, they're actually materialistic. But if they're be regarded as stepping stones, like different different steps of a ladder, finally leading up to the ultimate understanding that Krishna is the Supreme Personality, the Absolute Truth, then they're actually in line with the Vedic understanding. So in a similar way, we can regard science, modern science, in this connection. As long as the different branches of the modern science are taken independently, meaning that they're only dealing with a certain aspect, they're actually relative. They're dealing with the relative truth. Only if they're connecting or come to the conclusion that finally the ultimate source or the origin is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then they're helpful and they're leading us to the right conclusion. This is a very important point for devotees to understand, because many times different students actually also ask, then what is the use? Because this is one of the aspects of the Absolute Truth, that it's Achintya Veda Veda Tattva. It's inconceivable, one and the same, and at the same time it's different. Devotee understands that, because a devotee understands one has to be blessed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead to get the proper understanding. As Prabhupada points out, it is due to the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead that the inquisitive students actually receives the knowledge in the proper way. Only if the Supreme Personality of Godhead allows us, we will be able to understand it in the right context. Prabhupada actually quotes that verse from Bhagavad Gita, Tesham evanukampartam aham agyanajam tamaha nasayami atmabhavasto jnanadipena vashata. That the Supreme Personality of Godhead sitting in the heart of the devotee actually dispels the darkness of ignorance by the lamp of knowledge. This is also a very important point for us devotees to understand when it comes to the process of how to acquire proper knowledge. The materialistic understanding is that in order to gather knowledge, there are different requirements from the student's side. Means that he has that proper research aptitude and he needs the intellectual ability to acquire knowledge. But Prabhupada makes the distinct point that is not so when it comes to spiritual knowledge. In order to acquire spiritual knowledge, what is required is the submissive attitude of the students and his surrender to his teacher, to the spiritual master, or to the sadhus. Because by satisfying the spiritual master, then the knowledge will be revealed in the heart. In that way, it is not a matter of intellectual acquiring knowledge, but rather it's a matter of revelation. The pure knowledge or the transcendental knowledge actually will be revealed in the heart. And Prabhupada also makes the distinct point in the purport that being blessed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the inquisitive student actually receives the spiritual knowledge about the Absolute Truth, which also comprises the relative truths. So that means that a devotee not only becomes expert about the Absolute Truth, but he also understands the relative truths in perfect relation. As it already states, relative truth means these are truths, but they're relative. Relative to what? Relative to the Absolute Truth. That means one only gets the perfect understanding of these different fields of scientific knowledge, so to say, when they're in proper relation to the Absolute Truth. And finally, that is the desirable thing to achieve. Unless and until the living entity comes to that stage where he understands the Absolute Truth, he actually won't be able to understand his identity as being a part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, meant to serve the Absolute Truth, as it is the constitutional position of a part and parcel to actually assist the whole. Jai Shri Shri Gaur Nitai, Jai Jagannath Baladev, Subhadra Maharani Ki Jai. That is actually the most important knowledge for the living entity. If he is able to acquire that knowledge, he is actually reached perfection of life. And that is very nicely here described through the example of the knot in the heart. Prabhupada states in the purport, what is that knot in the heart actually? That knot in the heart is the misunderstanding of being the material body, the misidentification of ourself with matter. So the piercing of that knot is actually the transcendental understanding of spirit and matter. Because only when the living entities understands spirit and matter perfectly, he actually understands his position. And he sees the things as they are. Otherwise, he is always afflicted by the four disadvantages of being conditioned. That means that he is prone to be illusioned, he is prone to make mistakes, he has the tendency to cheat, and what is the fourth one? He has imperfect senses, yes. So, and this is actually the, so to say, the situation practically everybody in this material world is in. And Prabhupada many times makes the point, so what can we expect from somebody who's afflicted with these 4 disadvantages, what can we expect as a result of his studies? That means that the result or the conclusions also will have these 4 kind of defects. So that means they always will be in the relative sphere. And if we now come back to the definition of modern science, we actually can see it perfectly fits whatever the subject matter they're interested in belongs actually to the material realm. And the devotee, he actually wants to transcend this material realm. So there is something missing, and that is the unfortunate situation of nowadays world. That for somebody who really wants to know what the thing, how the things are, and who he is, and where he has come from, and what he's supposed to do, practically no education of today will satisfy his hunger for proper knowledge. And that is what Prabhupada many times lamented or stated, that there is no institution, no educational institutions in nowadays world who deals with the knowledge of the soul and gives that process, that education, which enables the living entity to transport himself to his original position as being purely spiritual, as being a part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, and that is the duty of a devotee of Krishna in the line of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, to try to convey this knowledge to whoever he meets. So that was the dear desire of Srila Prabhupada, knowing very well what kind of influence the scientific world has on humankind as such, to try to convince and show the right path, so that the whole world, the whole human race can benefit from being exposed to the transcendental knowledge. So, thank you very much. Any comments, any questions? Everything clear?
I can maybe try to formulate the question which was lingering in my mind. It was mentioned how Prabhupada explained that the pure devotee knows the absolute truth and then the relative truth as well. Please forgive me, I take the example of astrology. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is a pure devotee, and he understands the absolute truth. But then the relative truth of Jyotish, which is connected to the absolute as a means of understanding the material world. Jyotish, the eyes, he studied that. He sat down and he went through all the textbooks and probably had a teacher. So this statement from Prabhupada can be maybe misunderstood that a devotee simply by focusing on Krishna then, but no, he also makes an endeavor in terms of knowledge to acquire specific relative knowledge which might be useful. Or so can you maybe explain that a bit, how for a pure devotee, okay, he has the absolute knowledge, and then Prabhupada says he also has the relative knowledge, but then at the same time, how does it manifest in his life?
Well, maybe I can try to explain it like that. As the word relative already states, relative means it's relative to something. So we also can maybe say like he knows the absolute truth and he knows the value of the relative truth. Because the relative truth is always relative. Relative, in one way you also can say it's temporary. It only has an importance for a certain time. That's why also that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, actually he became the title Siddhanta because of his exclusive, like knowledge and expertise on the astrological signs. It was Saraswati. Oh yeah, Saraswati, because he wrote a book about astrology, but then he gave it up, understanding the relativeness of it. So that's the inconceivable aspect, of the absolute truth. In one way it is, and in one way it is not. Certain thing. Or we can explain it like that. Unless and until we're pure devotees, we are functioning in a relative realm. So it is naturally that we being engaged in these kinds of activities, because we can't jump over. If we artificially try to attain a certain stage, it's in the long run it will be futile. So, and a person who is well equipped with the absolute truth, he can guide, someone who is not on the perfectional stage, meaning that he is well aware how to use these informations, and in that way engages the different entities in that way. So that means also for us devotees, we should be aware, that it has its value, this knowledge. But the real value comes to stand if it's in connection with the Absolute. So if our aim is to reach the Absolute, then it will be a stepping stone being engaged in so-called relative truth, acquiring relative truth. But if we think that's the all in all, we will fail. And we will be hovering on a mental platform. Prabhupada actually what is the use of discussing these different philosophical topics? Because finally, the Vedic process of acquiring knowledge means that the living entity gets elevated. That means gets purified, makes advancement. And that advancement is actually, can be measured. And it is also very nicely described especially in these different verses where text 21 is the conclusion. Like in the beginning, the living entity is bewildered, being influenced by the three modes of material nature, especially ignorance and passion. Actually, what we notice or what we see nowadays, the majority of the people are in a mode of ignorance and passion. That means they get active during the day, and at the end of the day they feel tired, fall asleep, and that goes on day and day. But Prabhupada makes the distinct point, actually the Vedas made the distinct point, unless and until the living entities becomes free from the influence of ignorance and passion, he won't be able to understand the things as they are. That means he's illusioned and in darkness. So somebody who is illusioned in darkness, how he will understand? And this is a very important point for devotees to understand. That's why today also, it was first of all the goal of the Vedic science, acquiring, what is the goal of the Vedas, Vedanta, and what is the proper process, how to achieve it. Nowadays, the understanding of achieving knowledge means that of modern science is you go and you study. They don't consider whether your conduct is proper or not. But they don't understand, but finally they won't make any advancement. They will hovering on a mental platform because it's just acquiring different knowledges. But it won't help the individual to apavarga, to elevate himself. Rather, nowadays what actually happens is, instead of elevation, they degrade themselves. Degrade themselves meaning they get more and more entangled in material life. So that's why it is very important that one has the proper guidance. Once again, we can't jump being afflicted, influenced by the mode of ignorance and